than ever an important time to stay connected. Being truly connected to people in meaningful ways is something that I think we're all craving, and I find it to be an incredibly enriching experience.
I think that staying with Milwaukee Rotary through this pandemic both allows you to get information that is relevant to the times and still allows you to be part of a group where you can do other Zoom calls. Instead of us doing lunch or doing an event, we can also do Zoom calls with those that are in the Rotary group. So I stay and maintain my membership for the connection.
It won't be like this forever. We'll need to get back to normal life eventually, even though I'm sure it'll look slightly different. And those connections are still going to be important, and particularly the community building aspect and community rebuilding after all the kind of destruction that COVID is going to have throughout the community.
Service above self. I don't think that actually stops in a situation like this. I think that that's amplified in these kinds of times.
I think it's really vitally important to stay connected, to be connected, to lend voice, to participate, to understand and figure out how I can help individually and collectively as part of the Rotary organization contribute positively to the dialogue that's happening versus the divisiveness that's happening.
You know, I think if long-term you say you want to make someplace your home and you want to make your community better, it's great to be with a group of people that have that same mindset. But also, you know, when times are tough for you, either personally or professionally, that's a group that you can look to as well.
Welcome, all of you, to the Rotary Club of Milwaukee. I am Club President Darren Miller, President and owner of JM Construction. As we gather virtually today, we will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now, Karen Hung, founder and CEO of Silver Rock Consulting and immediate past president of Harvard Business School Alumni Club, will give our invocation today. Karen?
Thanks, President Darren. In reference to our speaker, Professor Adam Waytz' topic of humanity and in honor of Black History Month, I have two quotes for our invocation today. You must never be fearful about what you're doing when it is right. Rosa Parks. An individual has not started living until he can rise above the narrow confines of his individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity. Martin Luther King.
Thank you, Karen. It is my pleasure today to welcome our guests from the Harvard and Kellogg Business School Alumni Clubs for this special joint program. Over 50 guests have registered, many of whom have attended our joint programs in the past, so we're really glad to have all of you with us. I'd like you to know that our virtual programs are available to the public now, at least for the next few weeks, and we've got some great speakers lined up for March and April. Next week, Michael Antonelli from Baird will talk to us about Bitcoin. On March 9th, we will be joined by John Burke, president of Trek Bicycles. You can see our other upcoming programs on the screen, and we're excited to welcome Mark Murphy from the Green Bay Packers on April 6th. So please visit us again virtually, and of course, we welcome you to consider membership. For those unfamiliar with our Zoom meeting format, we will start off spotlighting the speakers, and once we move to the Q&A, we'll invite you to switch to gallery view so you will see who is with us here today. Thank you again to all of the Rotarians who contributed to our Rotary Now More Than Ever video series at the beginning of the program, which will also be played at the close of our program today. Next, we have an announcement about the golf, our upcoming golf outing. John Ferguson, Vice President of Business Development at Findorf and co-chair of the Scholarship Golf Classic Committee, will give our announcement about this upcoming golf outing.
Thanks, President Darren. If many of you are in Wisconsin today, where it's quite sunny, and you may be like me thinking about golf, and so I'm pleased to be here to announce our 2021 Rotary Scholarship Golf Classic. It's going to be held on Monday, June 7th at the Wisconsin Club Country Club. For those of you that don't know, we support 22 Rotary Scholars right now with money for their education, many in universities and colleges. We are happy to commit to them for the entire 4 years or more that it may take, both financially and with the mentorship of fellow Rotarians. Many of them are from low-income families, and many of them are also first generation to attend university. In the years since we've started, we've been able to raise over $500,000, which we're really excited to build on this year. And I'm happy to report that we're well over 50% of our current sponsorship goal. But that being said, there's many other opportunities to sponsor, to purchase a foursome and play. There's also auction items that if you have anything great to donate, we'd love to take that off your hands. And then we'll also be doing a reception after the golf, outdoors, socially distanced, here coming into June. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or my co-chair, Patrick Fennelly. There's also a lot of information on the Rotary website, and you're happy to visit there as well. So thanks, President Darren. Hope to see you all at our event on June 7th.
Thanks for the announcement, John. Last year's event was a great success and one of the highlights of my Rotary year. So look forward to participating this year and seeing all of you there. This Thursday at noon, our Thursday snack program, we will be featuring fellow Rotarian Beth Wierick, who will provide an update on how the Milwaukee Downtown Bid District is pivoted during COVID-19. And for those of you who are missing connections to your fellow Rotarians, the leaner snack format makes it possible to feel a bit more connected with others on the call. Just join us at 11:30 prior to the program start at noon for some informal connecting with Rotarians. And now, Bob Klug, a principal with RSA Capital, LLC, and most importantly, the president of the Kellogg Business School Alumni Club, will introduce our speaker. Bob?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. We always appreciate partnering with Rotary for these events. The Kellogg and Harvard clubs truly enjoy being part of these impactful conversations. Today, we're very fortunate to have Kellogg professor Adam Waytz join us to offer his thoughtful insights on human social connection in a world impacted by a number of realities, including automation, polarization, growing gaps in wealth, pandemic isolation, and others. Professor Waytz received his undergraduate degree in psychology from Columbia University. His PhD in social psychology is from the University of Chicago, and he also completed a doctoral fellowship at Harvard, a postgraduate. At Kellogg, he teaches ethics and decision management and has spent his career using social psychology and cognitive neuroscience to understand causes and consequences of how we all as humans are impacted by social connections, social influences, what he terms meaning making and ethics. He will offer his thoughts and concerns about growing dehumanization in our world, as well as what we can all do about it. And after this talk, if you'd like to learn more, his recent book, The Power of Human, delves into these challenges and opportunities in greater detail. And with that, please welcome Professor Adam Waytz.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen here and we will get started in just a moment. All right. Okay. All right. So.
Adam, you seem to be on presenter view.
Okay.
Rather than full screen.
One moment. Let's try this once more. How's that?
Good.
Excellent. All right. Okay, I'm managing multiple monitors here, but I'm ready to go. And I want to thank you all so much. I'm just really pleasantly surprised and happy to see so many of you on the call right now. As I was watching the opening video about what the Rotary Club does, it really, I think, addresses a lot of the things that I'll be talking about in my chat today, which is really about how to bring people together, especially in this kind of strange socially distanced time that we're living through now, so we can see more of each other's humanity. And so these types of clubs and organizations, alumni organizations, I think are increasingly valuable in our current time. Now, I also want to thank Mr. Klug for that really gracious introduction. And as he mentioned, this was the book that I wrote and published in 2019, which I will talk to you about today. Thankfully, thanks to him, I don't have to give too much of an introduction about myself. I always say, the first research I ever did on this topic of humanity and humanization showed that when you humanize someone or something, people care about it more. So I always try to humanize myself to begin with. But I don't have to tell you too much more of my story. I guess the only relevant missing detail outside of my academic career is that I was born and raised in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and spent a lot of time, driving through and to Wisconsin. So, also getting stopped for speeding on the way to Illinois and things like that as well. So I have a great affinity for Wisconsin and hope to be back there soon when things clear up. Now, Mr. Klug talked about my academic background as a psychologist, and that's really core to the talk for today. And so I just want to be clear what I mean by psychologist. So by psychologist, I don't mean the type of person who sees into the future or asks you about your mother or puts you on the couch. I have zero expertise in any of this sort of psychology. The type of psychology that I do, that I have my degree in, is really based on research. And what do I mean by research? Very simply, giving people surveys, asking people questions. How do you feel? What's your opinion? We look at how attitudes and opinions change based on if we alter something in the environment. We study people's behaviors. When do people behave ethically, unethically, kindly, aggressively? And I have a background in neuroscience as well. So from time to time, we scan people's brains to look at what are the neural underpinnings of their thoughts. And so the book I wrote is really based on 16, 17 years of research thinking about the topics of humanization and dehumanization and studying those things. And to define this kind of core concept that I'll be talking about, when you hear the word dehumanization, I think a lot of times what comes to mind is something like American slavery or the Holocaust or large-scale genocide. I'm talking about something more subtle, which is a more everyday phenomenon of really the failure to consider other people in their full humanity. And what I mean by full humanity is to really consider another person as a thinking and feeling being. So where we see everyday dehumanization is sort of the failure to recognize that other people have a mind, just like us. And this, I believe, is a problem. And then the flip side to this is seeing human, or humanization, whereby we engage with others at a deep level where we're recognizing them as fully thinking and feeling human beings. And so the argument that my book makes is that we are experiencing a dehumanizing shift and have been experiencing a dehumanizing shift since at least the late 1960s. And rather than just kind of making that claim, what I like to do as a researcher and as a research psychologist is I'm going to show you the data. Okay, so I'm going to talk a lot about data and actual empirical studies that illustrate these points. And so if I wanted to say to you, there's been this trend toward subtle dehumanization over the past 50 or 60 years, ideally I would have a survey showing you that people report more dehumanizing attitudes over time. And I don't have that exact survey, but I have a lot of related data points that speak to that. And one set of surveys I can point you to is a research project looking at empathy. Okay, now what do we mean by empathy? Empathy can be measured in terms of empathic concern. Surveys that ask people, you know, how frequently or how likely are you to feel pain when another person feels pain? Or through surveys that ask about perspective taking. Are you the type of person that tries to get into the mind of another person? Are you the type of person who considers other thoughts? And you can see that these things are very close to what I was talking about in terms of everyday dehumanization, engaging with another mind. And there was a really interesting research project that looked at surveys. These are surveys of college students, asking them to self-report their empathic concern and their tendency to take others' perspectives. And what they found was that when you look at thousands and thousands of college students' responses to these surveys over time, you see a decrease from the late 70s till about 10 years ago when the research project stopped, where you see this decline in empathy. All right. So these are American college students, thousands of surveys reporting over time demise in empathy. And you know, this isn't necessarily representative data. Maybe this is, you know, just has to do with younger people. But we can also look at other data sources, and probably the gold standard of research on this comes from the General Social Survey. General Social Survey is a big survey conducted with thousands of Americans every year, a nationally representative sample, so all sorts of demographics. And this survey has been asking a question since the early 1970s about trust. And the question they ask on the survey pretty much every year is, would you agree with the following statement? Do you think most people can be trusted? Agree or disagree? And what they find from the early 70s till kind of the mid 2010s is a decline in people responding affirmatively to this question. So here we have some preliminary data that suggests over a period of time, there's been a decline in empathy and a decline in general trust of other people. So we see this pattern of kind of disengagement. We can also look at pure reports of how much are people engaging with others. And again, I'm showing you survey data from thousands and thousands of respondents. The time frames are a little different on these surveys. This one goes from 1976 to 2018. This one goes from the late 80s till about a couple years ago. And these are survey responses from young people, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders, or in this case, entering college students and people in high school, just reporting how frequently do you get together with your friends, okay? Would you say that you get together with your friends almost every day? You could see a huge drop-off over time. And this is self-reports of how frequently you spend socializing and partying with your friends. Again, a huge decline over time. And you might look at this and say, okay, well, this makes sense given that most socializing has really just moved online. But if that were the whole story, then we would expect to see no effect on feelings of social isolation or loneliness. And instead, what you see over the same time period is a spike in loneliness, okay? So this is, again, from 1977 to 2017, young people's self-reports of loneliness. You see this little dip here, and then a real spike over the last 10 years. So putting all of this together, we see a decline in empathy. We just see a decline in trust. We just see a decline in just pure, how often do you get together with your friends, and we see a rise in self-reported feelings of loneliness, suggesting that people are feeling pulled apart. People are feeling disengaged from one another. And just to show you that this isn't an American-specific effect, I can point to data from around the world on a slightly different construct, which is individualism, okay? And what does individualism mean? Well, individualism means the tendency to say that the most important values are that people are free to do what they want as individuals, okay? So freedom of choice, freedom of agency, freedom of expression, all these good things. Basically, we're now going to look at surveys that ask people, you know, how much do you value certain things? And what we see over time across, you know, pretty much every country you can look at around the world. This is the result of Gallup surveys and the World Values Survey, asking about different values. You can see these are all the countries in the world, a rise in individualism, okay? And this is a good thing, by the way. Individualism is great, okay? But what individualism brings along with it is a decline in people saying that the collective is important, the family, the group, the nation, okay? So what people are basically saying here is that what's really important to me is my freedom and my rights and any individual's rights to do what they want. But what's less important to me is kind of the social fabric, the importance of getting together as a collective and following the will of the group. I'm not saying either of this is good or bad. I'm just saying it's a very robust trend across the world. And what this means is that, again, people are consistently thinking about themselves as individuals and less as part of a social whole. And where I think this manifests quite nicely is in my Chicago neighborhood. It's a very socially progressive neighborhood, the type of place where you'd see you know, politically progressive signs, families belong together, Black Lives Matter, you know, hate has no home here, things like that. And these types of messages are part of individualism. It's saying, you know, no matter who you are, you matter as an individual. But interestingly, as I write in the book, in the same neighborhood a few years ago before we lived here, there was real objection to turning an apartment building into a halfway house for people who are you know, coming home from prison or rehabbing from drug and alcohol addiction. And I think this perfectly encapsulates this kind of paradox where what the rise of individualism says is we want everyone to be free to be their own individual, no matter who they are. We just don't necessarily want to live next to them. Okay. And I think that is part of the phenomenon, part of this subtle dehumanizing shift as well. So this is kind of data from all over the place, but it gives you a sense of how people are sort of being pulled apart. Individualism is great. It gives us a lot of freedoms and those sorts of individual rights, and those values are very important. But it comes at the cost of saying, hey, you know, other people and the collective is important as well. Now, that's a lot of data, but I want to speak now for a moment to kind of where do we see this shift in dehumanization, and sort of, and in my book, I've organized this around kind of 4 pillars. And I call these the pillars of dehumanization because it's not really clear whether these things are a cause of this subtle dehumanizing shift or a consequence of these of this subtle dehumanizing shift. And so I'm sort of cheating here, but the real answer is both. Okay, the things that I'm going to talk about in terms of where do we see this subtle dehumanization is in terms of pillars that are both a cause and consequence. And I would say 3 of these will be tremendously unsurprising to you. The other one uses a little bit of jargon that I'll unpack. And so first, well, where do we see this kind of coming apart phenomenon with the rise of automation? And what do I mean by automation? I don't necessarily necessarily mean robots taking factory jobs. It mean the, automate, that idea that every daily function has become automated and I would say mediated through technology, which means people are increasingly separated by screens, which is obviously even more true during the pandemic. And so what's the result of that? Well, people are pulled apart from each other. There is no substitute for in real life interaction. I've done a lot of research on this, and there are actually tremendous benefits to using social media and phones to complement relationships that we already have with our friends in real life. But if you start using technology as a substitute, you don't get the benefits. As an old advisor of mine would say, using the internet to find social connection is like eating celery when you're hungry, okay? It only gets you a little bit of the way. So this is one pillar of this kind of dehumanizing shift. And the other pillar is perhaps unsurprising as well, which refers to the rise in political polarization, and whether this is the rise of politicians themselves becoming more at odds with each other, or the rise of people who hold differing views becoming more at odds with each other. The patterns are the same since the 60s and 70s. People on the political left and political right have grown increasingly at odds with each other. But aside from that kind of story, which we hear so much about in the media, what this really means is that people on the political left and right have less in common in general, just aside from political beliefs, less in common in terms of general habits like smoking, general favorite sports, favorite restaurants, different cuisines, different preferences for where they live. And so this polarization is not just a political issue, it also manifests in people on the political left and right having less in common. The same is true of this third pillar, which is the rise in income inequality, which again is a pattern that's been increasing over several years. I call this stratification, but this really just means people of low socioeconomic status and people of high socioeconomic status have not only grown apart in terms of income, wealth, whatever you want to, whichever metric you want to use, but also again in terms of general having things in common. All right, there's less in common if you're low SES or high SES than was the case, say, 30 years ago. The final pillar of kind of everyday dehumanization that I think has brought both kind of brought this shift and been a result of this shift is what I call marketization. And this idea of marketization is not actually my idea. It's illustrated in a great book by Harvard professor Michael Sandel called What Money Can't Buy. And he talks about how the rise of the free market has led to the marketization of everything. Things that used to rely on just kind of basic human communal interactions now operate in a buyer-seller mode. And he gives all sorts of these great examples, like how you can now buy access in certain metropolitan areas. You can buy access to driving in the carpool lane on the highway. So, usually the carpool lane, you have to be driving with another person to access the carpool lane. The idea is if we drive together, we reduce carbon emissions, and this is kind of something we do for the greater good. You can buy, as a solo driver in certain cities, access to drive in the carpool lane and have no issues. Okay, so this idea of kind of doing something good for the environment now gets reduced to this buyer-seller relationship, or various school programs that pay kids to read books or pay kids to get good grades. This used to be something we kind of do as part of a good community. We try to work hard in school. Teachers try to teach children things, and now it becomes a buyer-seller relationship. And what this means is that people are increasingly valued less in terms of their pure humanity. I try to not pollute, or I try to teach, or I try to be a good citizen because you're my fellow human. But instead, we start viewing people in terms of their financial value. And two extreme examples of this, but examples that would illustrate dehumanization, I will show you right here. One comes from the festival in Austin, Texas, the South by Southwest Festival, this big entertainment and tech festival, where a few years ago, a marketing firm said, okay, tens of thousands of people descend on Austin every year. We're going to set up something where we're going to hire homeless people to wear wireless routers and serve as Wi-Fi hotspots. And the idea is you could actually pay a homeless person who's wearing this shirt that says, I'm Clarence, I'm a hotspot for Wi-Fi, and then get some login information and log in to Clarence's network. And there was outrage in response to this because it's quite dehumanizing. You're essentially treating homeless people as a service, as a kind of good to be bought or sold. And many of these people were individuals recently displaced by Hurricane Katrina, I believe, as well. Or take another example where at Disney World, up until a few years ago, I'm not sure if this is still the policy, there was a policy that there were separate lines to get on the rides, kind of expedited lines for people with physical handicaps. And so what was discovered in an expose by the New York Post, I'm not sure how reliable the Post is, but this is corroborated, was that rich families were actually hiring handicapped individuals to serve as tour guides so they could get access to cutting the lines. Now, again, whatever you think about this, it's kind of reducing handicapped tour guides to a service and, kind of not viewing them in their full humanity. So these are kind of odd examples, but it gets us thinking about how everyday people we increasingly interact with people in terms of these buyer-seller relationships rather than, hey, you're my neighbor. Could you help me out shoveling the snow? We're going to be away for the weekend, something like that. Now, what I've just told you about is really my passion, which is studying this everyday dehumanization phenomenon. And when I talked to my book agent and said, I want to write a book on this trend, he said, that's a really interesting idea, but nobody wants to read a depressing book. And so, in fact, what I just told you about is only chapter 1 of the book. The rest of the book is to say, okay, well, why is this an issue and what can we do about it? And so in my remaining time, I'm going to tell you why, in fact, human beings are important. And kind of the obvious reason why they're important is because, and I see Patrick in the chat highlighting this, is because humans offer a source of social connection, okay? Social connection has as big of an effect on our health as, exercising, giving up smoking, giving up alcohol. Loneliness, by contrast, is a killer. And so human connection literally saves lives. And also, by the way, human connection is probably the biggest predictor of whether or not you're a happy person. Human connection is number 1. Satisfaction with your work tends to be number 2. But what I'm going to talk about here for the next few minutes is, why are humans psychologically important? Okay, beyond humans offering a source of connection, why is the mere presence of humans, why does that give our life some kind of added boost, added satisfaction? And what I describe in the book is there are really 4 reasons why this is the case, okay? 1, the mere presence of a human being, or seeing another human, or experiencing the touch of another human being, really creates a sense of meaning. And there's this example throughout history of the idea of royal touch. Okay, this is idea surrounding Christian saints or English and French monarchs through the late Middle Ages and the 19th century, where there were these certain individuals in society where if they touch you, they could heal you. okay? And this is ascribed to saints and royals and people like this. But it turns out that everyday human beings, the power of touch for everyday human beings is actually kind of magical. So it communicates this kind of meaning. And the most striking examples of this is that there are all these studies showing that if you inflict pain on people, which some individuals do in the lab, you used to be able to do this in psychology studies in the 60s and 70s. It's very hard to do this these days, but people still do. You can kind of increase pain in someone's hand through an electric shock, or make people experience extreme heat in the lab, and they report how much pain they experience, or they report that you can look at their brain scans to see are regions associated with pain active. And it turns out that if you are touching another person's hand while experiencing pain, you experience less pain. You report less pain, it feels less painful, your brain responds with less of a pain response. So there's this kind of magical power of touching another person's hand, particularly a loved one. Other work has shown really strange effects of this power of human touch. So basketball teams in the NBA that touch each other more high-fiving and backslapping, win more. And the reason why they win more is because they actually cooperate more on the court. There's more assists and kind of other taking the extra pass and those types of behaviors. This is work from Berkeley that showed this. So there's a real power of human touch to do all these amazingly meaningful things, but also at a basic kind of consumer level. People value things more when they believe they were produced by a human. So really, actually, for my HBS folks on the call, really wild study from HBS, some HBS professors who I know, they had students at the Harvard Business School cafeteria participate in this study where they go to the sandwich line, which is like at Subway, but this is at Harvard Business School, and they order a sandwich. And they're told to, go wait over here, we'll bring you the sandwich. And then they kind of report how much do you enjoy the sandwich experience. And they say it was reasonably good. Or like at Subway, they have people order the sandwich, watch a human being make the sandwich, get the sandwich, report how did they enjoy the sandwich experience. People enjoy their food more when they observe a human actually making that food. And this is not a one-off study. This is part of a bigger line of work showing that knowing a human was involved in the production of your services or whatever product you're receiving places some extra value on that. People value human labor. And this is also why people will actually pay more for human-made items versus machine-made items. So that exact same scarf, if I told you a human made this versus a machine made this, people would pay more for the human-made scarf. People pay more for celebrity auction items that had physical contact with the former owner. This is a study of JFK, his auction, Marilyn Monroe's estate auction. Even weirder, people even, if you give people a massage through a massage chair and have a human being controlling the remote control for the massage chair, they enjoy the massage more than if the massage was purely automated. So this has all sorts of business implications for, are you highlighting the humans involved in the services you're providing? Because humans have this kind of magical power. They seem, people value human beings. Humans create a sense of meaning. Another big way that I think humans have power is that the presence of a human being immediately activates our moral senses. And what do I mean by this? Well, as soon as we see anything that resembles a human being, a human face, hear a human voice, experience human touch, we become more careful toward others. We exhibit more compassion. And Honda actually took this into account when they were designing one of their motorcycles a few years ago. They designed the motorcycle specifically to resemble a human face because of research they had done showing that, well, when you see a human face, you start being more careful toward others on the road. You start caring more about other people. This is also why a lot of research has shown that the best way for any charity to, get donations is to present the image of a single human being. If you present multiple human beings, well, is that a human? No, that's a group, okay? But if you present the face of a single human being, that looks like a human, and people care more. They want to donate to your cause. And so there's a lot of evidence that simple cues to humanity make people respond with more compassion. Single individuals prompt more caretaking behavior than looking at groups of people, because what does it mean to be a human? Well, a single individual looks like a human. Stalin purportedly said, the death of a single Russian soldier is a tragedy. The death of 10 million Russian soldiers is a statistic. He didn't actually say that, and Stalin isn't someone I want to be known as quoting affirmatively, but the psychology is right, okay? The psychology is right that a single individual looks like a human and makes us care more. Even animals that look more human-like get more donations to the World Wildlife Fund and are cared for more. And then there's all these strange studies in the lab. Even if you give a vegetable a name, like a tomato, people react more negatively when you pierce the tomato named Darren with a needle. So anyway, the idea here is that humans activate our moral sense as well. I'll give you two final ways that humans have this psychological power, and then I'll wrap up, which is that humans move us to act in ways that benefit the collective. What do I mean by that? I think a lot of you in your line of work, you're interested, maybe even if you don't know it, you're interested in influence and persuasion. You want to get people to do things. And it turns out there is no better way to get people to do things than telling them another human is doing it as well. And this might seem obvious. Indeed, this is the conformity principle that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, but people underestimate the power of other humans as a source of influence and moving people to act. And so my favorite study demonstrating this was a study where a bunch of researchers called up thousands of people living in California, in Southern California, and they said, we're interested in the reasons why people might save energy, save household energy. And when you think about the following reasons, this is a phone survey, how would you rate the amount of influence that each of these things has over your decision to save energy in your house? So how important is protecting the environment? How influential is that when you think about reasons to save energy? And the y-axis here is, their reported amount of influence. So when you ask people about protecting the environment, they say, yeah, that's pretty important. Then they'll ask, well, how influential is the idea that you could benefit society? People say, oh, that's reasonably important. How influential is the idea that you can save money by saving energy? And people say that's kind of important. And then you ask people, how influential is the idea that, well, your neighbors are saving energy too, and this is a social norm? And this is what people say, okay? When you ask them, how influential are each of these reasons on your decision to save energy in your household? And they actually say, other humans have the least effect on my behavior. Wanting to protect the environment has the most effect. So then they go to these California neighborhoods and they put little door tags on the doors of these various houses, and they partner with the energy company, and they're actually going to monitor energy consumption in these households over a period of a few weeks. And the doors they put on, the signs they put on people's doors give them various messages about the importance of saving energy. And they give them different messages based on that survey. So some people are given the message, please save energy to help the environment, please save energy to benefit society, please save energy to save money. And some people receive the message, please save energy because your neighbors are saving energy. And then some houses receive no sign. And so when you look at how much energy do these households consume over a period of weeks following this kind of door sign intervention, where higher numbers mean more energy consumption, here's what you see. Remember, higher numbers mean using more energy. What you see is that none of these signs really had a meaningful effect beyond no sign at all. But telling people that, hey, your neighbors are conserving energy had a really meaningful effect. So what this tells us is that despite people saying, yeah, what my neighbors do, that doesn't have much influence over my decision to conserve energy. In practice, what other people do, what other humans do, has a massive effect on our behavior. Now, the final reason why humans are psychologically powerful is because humans motivate us to do things that we wouldn't necessarily do on behalf of ourselves, okay? Other humans. And a friend of mine who I went to grad school with called this the James Bond effect, which I want to unpack in my last minute before we get into Q&A. Okay, so why did he call this idea the James Bond effect? That people will do things on behalf of other humans they wouldn't do that for themselves. Well, it's because of the old James Bond trope where Bond gets captured by the villain, and the villain says, give me the code, give me the keys, give me the diamond, or else I'm going to torture you. And Bond says, you can torture me all you want, I'm never going to tell you, or I'm never going to give up the secret. All right. But then the villain introduces Bond's girlfriend and says, okay, well, if you don't tell me, I'm going to torture her. And immediately Bond leaps into action or gives up the secret or gives up the code or whatever. The idea being that we often do things on behalf of other humans that we wouldn't do for ourselves. And this actually, even though the example I'm giving is a little bit light, has all sorts of organizational consequences, because over the past 15 years, we've learned that people, if you want to motivate people, people will often work harder when they know they're working on behalf of other people than just for their own rise in a paycheck. Or people will work harder when they feel that companies benefit social causes or donate to other humans. And people are happier when their work results in helping others versus helping themselves. So this is kind of the thesis of the book. Yes, there's this dehumanizing shift. Humans are extremely psychologically important, so we want to do something about it. And to kind of give you the teaser for the rest of the book deals with, okay, well, how do we bring more humanity to the workplace, to our interactions with technology, to conflict situations, and to our close relationships? So with that, I want to say thank you again for letting me talk so much, and I am happy to take questions now.
Okay, well, thank you, Adam. This is Mary, and I'm going to facilitate the Q&A here. I would encourage all of you to switch to the gallery view if you like, so you can see who else is here, but put your questions in the chat. And one question that we have here has to do with listening. Do you have any research that talks about on an organizational level or at a personal level, how listening impacts dehumanization or humanization?
Indirectly, yes. And the research that I talk about in the book, I promise I'll circle back to the workplace, but the research I talk about in the book has to do with conflict situations. So intergroup conflict, you could think about political conflict, ideological conflict, ethnic conflict in various regions. And people want to know, how do you resolve these types of conflict to make two groups see each other as more human? Is this liberal conservative? Is this Israeli Palestinian?
I think this week for you guys.
And so what that research shows, and again, I will relate this back to the workplace in a moment, is that in any conflict or in any real situation between two people, there's going to be a difference in power. And if you want to solve any conflict when there's two people who differ in power, you can't take a one-size approach. It turns out that the people who are lower in power really benefit from having voice, being able to give their perspective on the situation. And it's the people in power who really benefit from hearing the other side's perspective. And so when you bring us back to the issue of listening, where listening is really important is for people who are highest in power in the organization. It might be something that they don't want to do, but it turns out that it's people in power who benefit the most from deep listening and then responding to that. Because really what people want, when we talk about, okay, this issue, it's kind of this fuzzy issue. What does it mean to feel human? It's really, what people mean is they want to feel like they matter. And how do you let people feel like they matter? You give them voice. And so the act of listening alone gives people a sense of voice, makes them feel more human, and tends to benefit the people in power as well.
Well, thank you. That was a great answer. Pat Cronin says, several years ago, Theresa May's UK government appointed a minister of loneliness, which was snickered at the time by many in the USA. Perhaps she or they were onto something?
Absolutely. What's interesting is I think 2 days ago, Japan reported appointing a loneliness minister as well to deal with the rising suicide rate in Japan. And so, countries are starting to get the message that this is a public health issue. I've alluded to an old advisor of mine who sadly passed away, John Cassioppo, was a mentor of mine at U Chicago, and he was really the first person to thoroughly document the health consequences of a lack of connection. Okay, and by the way, why does loneliness have an effect on our health? Why does loneliness even increase the risk of getting a cold? Because what loneliness is it's a stressor. And what does stress do? Stress produces cortisol in our body. And what does cortisol do? It weakens our immune system and makes us more susceptible to all these things. So, when I started writing this book, the idea was just to say, well, humans are important psychologically. We do all these things when we're in the presence of another human that are pretty remarkable. But even beyond that, this issue of loneliness and being disconnected from other humans is incredibly important for our well-being.
Okay, thank you. Ruben Avia asks, what best practices have you seen in the workplace to increase humanization in the workplace, especially in remote scenarios?
Yeah, well, centering on the last part of that question for a moment, I thought that once you had people starting to work remote, they would feel less human. And this would be really bad for them because all of a sudden, and you guys are probably experiencing this as well, your work life and your home life start mixing together, and that just doesn't feel uncomfortable. That just doesn't feel comfortable. It's too confusing. But we actually did some research on this around May of last year when people started, working remotely, and some people were still at work. And we compared people who were working at work, during the pandemic, or people who are working at home, and people who are working at home reported feeling more authentic and thereby more human. So that was a surprise to us. The biggest thing I talk about in the book, what are best practices for the workplace, is just giving people a break, okay? Letting people go off the clock. Where I think remote work practices are really negative are when they make you feel like you need to always be on, okay? Now that you're working from home, you're working all the time, all right? And by the way, that's how a lot of people felt before the pandemic as well. They call it the 24/7 workplace. And then, what these companies, like a lot of these Silicon Valley companies do, they start creating these things that, in theory are great. Oh, we have here's a room for resting. Here's a ping pong table. Here's, Facebook campus has physical therapy you can go to, all sorts of these things that are supposed to give you leisure at work. But what you're implicitly doing is you're just keeping people tied to work. So I have an entirely different talk about the importance of just letting people completely disconnect from work. And that's the most important thing in terms of best practices for the workplace.
Good advice. I have two questions that I'm going to ask you together because I think you might be able to tie them together in some way. One is from Frank Cumberbatch. Does this dehumanizing trend correlate to a rise in crime? And then Steve Chevalier says humanization can be negative as well. What happened? What about the attack on the Capitol? Weren't the people who attacked the Capitol motivated by others?
Right. So Franklin's question is easier to answer because the answer is I don't know. I think it's a fascinating question. It's a great question. I really don't know the answer. I do know, Steven Pinker, who wrote this massive book on the decline of violence over time. He would say, broadly, if you look over kind of decades and centuries, crime has gone down, and he would even make the case that that's true in recent years. So that's a big kind of messy, thorny data question. He would also probably disagree with my characterization of a dehumanizing shift. I'm looking at a more protracted time period from the 60s to today. He's looking over evolutionary history. So I just think it's a great question. It's something I would want to know. Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to it. Now, to the question about humanization as a negative, absolutely correct. So I mentioned humans move people to do things that they wouldn't necessarily do on their own, and to do things on behalf of a collective, like help the environment, things like that, save energy, things like that. But if we look at kind of the worst atrocities in history, and this was really popularized in kind of early sociology work. I think there's this famous book, The Crowd, or even social psychology, my home discipline, came out of trying to understand the Holocaust. One consistent finding is that people do all sorts of, aggressive things in a group that they would never do on their own, right? So they would, and there's a lot of different mechanisms at play, but people, this is true on the internet as well, right? When you feel like you're part of a mass, your humanity and your responsibility becomes diminished, and therefore you can do all sorts of things because you're looking at other people around you. You might not be a nasty person, but if kind of everyone's kind of doing the same thing, then it becomes very easy for the power of human to have these negative effects as well, or kind of counter positive effects as well. So it's an excellent point.
One last question from Bob Klug. Can you offer one or two suggestions that might be instructive to lessen the political conflicts and the interpersonal political conflicts that we have been experiencing in 2020 and 2021?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is like the topic of the day. I just did a talk for a synagogue in New York that wanted me to speak on this topic. And so I have two pieces of advice. This is something we should be spending like a 10-week class on. But, and I'll preface that by saying, despite this being such a topic of interest, I don't think there are great answers, but here's two. Okay. One, I would focus, here's some counterintuitive advice. I would focus less on the idea of unity and we all have to get along and we all have to get on the same page versus let's focus on our differences and let's actually talk about our differences. That seems to be a more productive approach than this kind of idealized idea that you can just tell people we're all Americans, we're all in this together. For whatever reason, that doesn't seem to work anymore. COVID was a test case of this. Political theorists and psychologists always like to imagine, well, what if we were under an alien attack? Wouldn't liberals and conservatives just get along because we'd all have to defend ourselves against the aliens? To me, COVID was the test case. We just experienced an alien attack, and I would say things got worse. So instead of trying to bring people together toward a common enemy, a common goal, let's just be comfortable with difference. Let's be comfortable with difference, and let's talk about difference, okay? So that's kind of step one, talking about difference. And 2.0 to that is, let's recognize that there are differences in power. High power people need different things from low power things. High power people would like to keep the status quo. Low power people would like to change the status quo. Let's try to focus on both of these things. The second one operates at the much more micro level, which is, what do you do when you encounter someone who holds different political beliefs and policy beliefs from you? How do you diffuse that? When someone has an extreme view about, say, immigration or abortion or carbon emissions or taxes or anything, how do you diffuse that view? And this is true of whether you're on the political left or right on these issues. It turns out, and this is, again, much more at the micro level, kind of the dinner table level, what you want to do is ask people to explain why they hold that view. Okay. And the reason why you do that, and the reason why it's a diffuser, is because whenever people start explaining something, they realize they don't have as much knowledge about the issue as they think they did, and they reduce their extremity. Okay. This is called the illusion of explanatory depth. And it was first demonstrated, I know we're close to time, but I want to draw this out. If you ask someone, if you ask, the people on this call, do you know how a refrigerator works? Yes or no? A majority of people would say yes. But then if you ask them, okay, tell me how a refrigerator works, they'd start to question their own knowledge, and they would be less extreme in their confidence. Similarly, if someone is in favor of this healthcare plan or this tax plan or this, immigration plan, and they have really strong views, if you ask them, okay, well, how would that play out? They start to realize, oh, this is complex. It's the illusion of explanatory depth, and they back off their extreme position. So that's kind of a more in the moment solution, which I
thank you. Yeah. And that's a great place to start closing out here. I would say we have one more comment in the chat, which is, let's get Adam back to speak on the second topic about letting people disconnect completely from work. That would be really interesting as well. So perhaps you'll be willing to come back for another program, Adam. So sure. Thank you. I'm going to give you a virtual applause as I turn this back to President Darren to close us out. So thank you.
Adam, thank you so much for being here with us today. I certainly can draw a number of parallels to Rotary's four-way test with your talk with us today. So again, really appreciate you being here with us. And in honor of leaders like yourself who speak to our club members, we will be making a donation in your name to the YWCA of Southeast Wisconsin, whose mission is eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you also to all of our Kellogg and Harvard friends for joining us today. We hope to see you back here again. Next week, join us to welcome Michael Antonelli for a lively discussion on Bitcoin and how to think about digital assets in the future. And then on March 9th, we will be back to hear from John Burke, CEO of the Trek Bicycle Corporation. Hope to see you all this Thursday at our snack program at noon with Beth Wierick to learn about the downtown bid. And as we close today, we will also have another opportunity to see our Rotary Now More Than Ever video series. Again, thank you all for being here today. Our meeting is adjourned.
I believe that now is more than ever an important time to stay connected. Being truly connected to people in meaningful ways is something that I think we're all craving, and I find it to be an incredibly enriching experience.
I think that staying with Milwaukee Rotary through this pandemic both allows you to get information that is relevant to the times and still allows you to be part of a group where you can do other Zoom calls. Instead of us doing lunch or doing an event, we can also do Zoom calls with those that are in the Rotary group. So I stay and maintain my main membership for the connection.
It won't be like this forever. We'll need to get back to normal life eventually, even though I'm sure it'll look slightly different. And those connections are still going to be important, and particularly the community building aspect and community rebuilding after all the kind of destruction that COVID is going to have throughout the community.
Service above self. I don't think that that actually stops in a situation like this. I think that that's amplified in these kinds of times.
I think it's really vitally important to stay connected, to be connected, to lend voice, to participate, to understand and figure out how I can help individually and collectively as part of the Rotary organization contribute positively to the dialogue that's happening versus the divisiveness that's happening.
You know, I think if long-term you say you want to make someplace your home and you want to make your community better, it's great to be with a group of people that have that same mindset. But also, you know, when times are tough for you, either personally or professionally, that's a group that you can look to as well.